Hello, Nick.
Hi, Nick.
And hello to all of our listeners out there. Welcome to the Nick Squared podcast. Today we'll be discussing some indicators of the economic cycle, otherwise known as early recession indicators. But don't fret, my little economic fritters. There are a number of early recession indicators that investors watch to try to gauge the health of the United States economy. Today we'll be focusing on the Consumer Confidence Index, employment data, and the yield curve. We'll take a look at how they are constructed, what they represent, and try to interpret what their current values mean for our economy. Nick, can you please start us off with the Consumer Confidence Index?
Absolutely, Nick. The Consumer Confidence Index is the most cited consumer confidence survey in the United States. It's conducted by the Conference Board. It tracks the responses of 5,000 households on their personal feelings about the present and future economy. It was started in 1967 and is generally accepted as a leading early recession indicator. The idea is if consumers are optimistic, they will be more open to spending and therefore stimulate the economy. It's released on the last Tuesday of every month.
Nice. What specifically does the Consumer Confidence Index look at?
Well, the survey is simple. It's 5 core questions with 3 choices: positive, negative, or neutral. It's broken down into 2 indexes. The Present Situation Index, which is comprised of questions regarding current business conditions and current employment conditions, and the Expectations Index, which is comprised of business conditions, employment conditions, and total family income 6 months from now. Scores are benchmarked at 1985 equals a score of 100. The Conference Board tries to get a proportionate representation of the population through evaluation of demographics and locations. Software is used to adjust for seasonal fluctuations such as the beginning of the school year, holidays, and weather.
Okay. How do we interpret the current state of the Consumer Confidence Index?
Well, it's hard to interpret right now. The June 2020 value is 98.1. That's down from 132.6 in February 2020, but up from 86.6 in May. The May decrease of greater than 40% in just 5 months is the most rapid 40% or more decrease in the last 30 years. But again, the index appears to be bouncing back. Compare that to the Great Recession of 2008, which saw a decrease by 41% after 9 months, the economic downturn of 2001, which saw just a 34% decrease in about a year, and the 1990 recession, which showed a decrease of greater than 40% at 6 months.
I would think that the consumer confidence would continue to decrease through a recession. Is that the case?
Yeah, it's debated whether the Consumer Confidence Index is a lagging or leading indicator because all of these 40% decreases began before the 3 recessions but didn't reach their nadirs until several months later.
How reliable a recession predictor is a consumer confidence indicator?
The Consumer Confidence Indicator is susceptible to false positives. In 2011, it reached a value of 40.9, which is a decrease of greater than 40% from 8 months before, and there was no ensuing recession. So its reliability is just so-so.
Okay. Well, most consumers have jobs, so now let's talk about our next early recession indicator, employment data.
Okay, I know the current unemployment rate is making headlines, but just how bad is it?
Yeah, Nick, the unemployment rate is at a 50-year high. To put it into context, in October 2009, the unemployment rate was just at 10%. Right now, the unemployment rate is at 13.3, but this past April, it reached 14.7. This unemployment rate represents over 20.5 million jobs lost in the US economy. This represents the highest level of unemployment since the Great Depression. But the good news is that the unemployment rate is spurred on by the COVID-19 closures. And as states begin to reopen, people will head back to work and the unemployment rate will begin to decrease.
Well, how can we possibly know just how many people are out of work?
Well, we get this information from the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics. The Current Population Survey, or CPS, is a monthly survey of households conducted by the Bureau of Census for the Bureau of Labor Statistics. The survey provides a comprehensive body of data on the labor force, unemployment, employment, persons not in the labor force, hours of work, earnings, and other demographic and labor force characteristics.
Is there any other part of U.S. employment data from this survey that can help us look at the economy?
Yes. Actually, the hours of work are another really interesting factor to look at in the unemployment data. When the economy begins to slow, employers react first by cutting employees' hours. This shows that they are getting really concerned about the future and their ability to retain employees full-time. Let's dive deeper into the manufacturing industry as an example. In the last decade, the only time the number of hours declined was in 2008, during the last recession, and that was to 39.3 hours. In 2018, the number of hours worked peaked at 42.4, and right now we are experiencing an even lower drop than we witnessed in the 2008 recession at 38.3.
What does this employment data mean for our economy right now?
Well, the combination of number of hours worked with the vast number of unemployment are important employment measures because they show us what employers think about our economy. These measurements show that if employers fear they cannot afford wages, they will cut back on employment. And this will affect the economy because the unemployed individuals cannot qualify to purchase bigger items such as homes or cars that actually help drive our economy. Also, when people have a fear of unemployment or uncertainty, they tend to save their money instead of spending it, thus freezing the economic stimulation.
Finally, we'd like to shift gears to what is regarded as the most reliable economic indicator, the yield curve.
The yield curve is another common economic indicator that investors use to evaluate our economy. The yield curve is a graph that compares yield rates of different U.S. Treasury bills, notes, and bonds in terms ranging from 1 month to 30 years. Yield rates are placed on the y-axis of the graph, and the x-axis has term maturity dates. The yield curve becomes concerning for recession when it inverts.
That's right. Since there's more risk to locking up money for longer terms than shorter terms, investors generally expect that if they purchase a treasury bond with a longer maturity date, the interest rate should be higher. When investors lose confidence in the short-term economic outlook, investors begin to purchase more long-term bonds, which lowers the longer-term yield. At the same time, investors are less likely to purchase short-term bonds, which decreases short-term bond prices and increases their yields. The most concerning inversion features the 10-year bond yield compared to the 2-year bond yield. This is also known as the 2-10 inversion. This type of inversion has come before every U.S. recession since 1950.
Wow. Can't the government just lower the short-term interest rates to make the yield curve slope up again?
When we hear about the government adjusting interest rates in the news, they're really adjusting the overnight reserve loan interest rates. That's about a 12-hour loan. This may indirectly affect the shorter-term treasury bill rates, but it's supply and demand of investors purchasing the bonds that affects the longer-term rates.
If yield curves are released daily, won't it invert from time to time just randomly? What do we make out of short-term inversions?
Good point. Let's look at the last 3 recessions as an example. The 1990 recession showed an inversion that lasted 3 months and uninverted about 11 months prior to the recession. The 2001 recession inversion lasted 6 months and uninverted about 3 months prior to the recession. And the 2008 recession was preceded by a yield curve that lasted 13 months and uninverted about 4 months prior to the recession.
How long after the inversion can we expect a recession?
Looking at the last 3 recessions, the inversion started about a year prior to the recessions. Historically, the lag has occurred up to 2 years prior to an ensuing recession.
Wow. In 2019, the United States sustained a 4.5-month yield curve inversion. That inversion started May 2019, and we also see decreasing consumer confidence index. Aren't we getting close to a recession window?
The indicators do seem to be converging on this very possibility. Indeed, there are models out there such as Fred, which suggest that our probability of a recession in 2020 is around 50% or higher.
Oh, always fun to end on a positive note. Well, thanks for such an interesting discussion, Nick. It was a great conversation, and I actually learned a lot. Thank you to all our listeners out there. This podcast was produced in part by UNM MGMT 526 Financial Decision Making at UNM Anderson. It's been a pleasure. I'm your co-host, Nick Griffith.
And I'm Nick Crozier.
Thanks again, and be sure to tune in next week when we will discuss how to calculate mortgage payments.